I'm talking today on messy integration testing, and that wasn't what the original title was. I'll get to the original title in just a minute, I promise. I bet all of you who have ever had to do any form of testing at all, particularly integration testing, have been told, you need to focus on end-to-end testing. If we can get from here to here, everything is good, right? You've all heard that? Well, many of you have, some of you have heard that? Okay. How many of you believe that? Nobody's nodding. No bunch of people are shaking their heads. Once upon a time, then I may be preaching to the choir, by the way. Once upon a time, many years ago, several jobs ago, I was a newly minted QA lead, which at that company meant that I was the test lead. Actually, at that time, that meant I was the tester. 100 developers, 1 tester. Oh. Yeah, just got to be really good. And their practice for this particular very central worldview, heavy control-centric methodology for their process, their key system, the thing that kept the company in business. It wasn't their core business. Software wasn't what they did, but this is the software that drove what they did. They were a self-distributed retail chain. For those of you who aren't from the United States, that means that they were a grocery outlet who had their own distribution center, their own transportation fleet. They received goods coming in and they shipped it out to their own stores. They also shipped it out to other retailers in the area who were independent retailers, which meant it was kind of fun because that meant that they were supplying their competition, sort of. But they had this one central system, and you needed information here, and information here, and information here, and information here, and information here. Everything just worked. If you do that, everybody's happy, right? Their rule of thumb, and I was told this by someone whom I actually have a great deal of respect for, who still works there, was our normal process for testing this is to execute 3 times without any errors. If we can do that, it's good. And they go live. Did I mention that their item database had 500,000 items? How many times are you going to be able to exercise more than a smidgen of that within those 3 cycles? You're probably not, right? Because there is, at this top point, there's this system up here that involves their central distribution center software. That's the stuff that controls where stuff is stored, right? Then there's another section in here that does other things. It just kind of acts as a bridge, makes reports, things like that, kind of boring. Then there's retail item. This is the stuff that if you go into a grocery store, you see on the shelf. This is all the information about that. There's a relationship there, and there's also a relationship here. There's also stuff down here, and that involves ordering and billing and all that kind of boring stuff that everybody who's ever worked for a real company knows that they have to deal with. Let me rephrase it. Everybody who's ever worked for a company that's actually had to deliver something and stay in business so they make money so they can pay people and pay the stockholders and all that kind of stuff knows what they have to deal with. Some of our friendly neighborhood talking head consultants have an issue with that. Real world work isn't pretty sometimes. And then we get down to where I like to think of the metal meets the meat. In some cases, literally, because this is how we handle stuff that gets shipped out. The stuff that gets to the individual stores so that retailers can have it on the shelves and customers can come in and pick it up and buy it. And then, of course, you need something that will handle all this stuff, right? Pretty straightforward, really normal. None of this is revolutionary to people, right? All of you have seen some idea like this, the whole system of systems idea, right? Nothing at all new. So how many of you work in shops or deal with managers or deal with other people where they seem to think that the system is the black line in the middle? Ain't it great? How many of you are fortunate enough to work in shops where managers, bosses, business owners, project managers, business analysts realize that your system is multiple systems? You work in a very confused shop. You've got, or do you have people who think both?
Internal Revenue Service. Yes, it's a very
There goes any punchline I could possibly have. Thanks, Mimi. So in my naivete, this, by the way, is a disaster story. You know, this is kind of like the Poseidon Adventure of software testing. We had this system come in, and so we tested this little piece, and we tested this little bit, and we tested this little bit, and all the way down the line, and okay, we found a lot of bugs. Eventually, we got to the point where we had 3 clean passes of the whole kit and caboodle, and everybody was happy. A week and a half after it went into production, distribution center control crashed. It came down hard. As in, they get out the legal pad and they're going through with pads of paper, and guys with computerized high-low directions are going, where do I go now? Because they've got nowhere to go. They don't know what their next thing that they're either picking up or dropping off is. Okay, got that fixed. No big deal. Obviously, something was wrong with that system. By the way, that's the top loop. That's the one that didn't change. A week or so after that, these guys crashed hard. Same thing. Stuff just isn't working. What do you do now? Well, you're seeing the pattern, right? Everything just kind of falls apart. That educated me very quickly. And from that point on, I said, this is a silly thing to do, to count on just this. And so from that point on, and if you haven't tried this, it's actually a lot of fun. Make yourself a test lab. Get a lab or an environment where you can have people test, and then get people to come in and play with it. Even if they're not touching the system that you're working on, try it. Because I'll bet money, when you're doing user acceptance testing or whatever your organization calls whatever that function is, or that type of function, where there's some person who's seeing if this is really going to work. I know it depends. User acceptance testing can be a heated phrase. It can be one where people debate whether or not it's legitimately there, but you get the idea, right? Rather than having them just look at the test, at the system that you changed, look at everything. And the idea that I had, and it was original to this company, and I expect that many other people have come up with that, is to do messy integration testing, where we're going to have people come in and just hammer the daylights out of this system, and this one, and this one, and this one, and just everybody who knows how that system is supposed to work, come and work on it when it's talking to the new system. Set up an environment. Not everyone can do this, I recognize that. Set up an environment where the new system is integrating with a clone of the current production system. Get that to try it together. Because what happens is that the people who are working up here and the people who are working down here are normally not the same person. If you've got a company that's more than a couple dozen people, it's going to be somebody else. And if you work for a company like this that had several thousand people, they may not even be in the same city, let alone the same building. They're probably not even in the same state or country in some of your cases. So how do you know what your users are doing? The people that are using the software that you're supposed to be making it for. Anybody ever see the movie Pulp Fiction? Kind of strange movie, isn't it? Whole lot of little vignettes. Things happen. It focuses on a couple of people, but you look at it and it's one core storyline, but it's told from different angles. My worldview around integration testing now is we need to test as if we're in the movie Pulp Fiction. We need to come in and, yes, aside from all the blood and gore and in reference to varied and sundry illegal controlled substances, we need to have a worldview that says this stuff that we're doing here and here and here may not be related directly, but they're all related. And that is what the movie Pulp Fiction is about. All the stuff that's happening appears to be disconnected because you see things out of sequence in a linear fashion. You don't see them in this sequence, but you see them in the sequence of this system and this system and this system and each system down the line. Because each story is related. You may not have a firm idea as to what that story altogether is, but the people who use these individual systems do. And so I would encourage everyone to maybe not get out Mr. Wolf who fixes problems, and maybe not have Marcellus threatening people, maybe not have the John Travolta character, whose name I've forgotten right now, and engage in varied and sundry levels of felony assault and things like that. But you get the idea, I hope. Everything can come together. Get your people who use your system, use the non-linear system to test. Have people come in and take a look at what it is that you're doing. Because if they're hammering the daylights out of this, and somebody else is hammering the daylights out of this, and somebody else is beating up on this, they're going to do a far more thorough and aggressive test than you possibly can come up with. Let them play. Because then you're going to break the system. Oh, by the way, the aftermath of this. The next time that we had to rewrite the system because the current version was so badly kludged and was just a mess, we took this approach. Went live. It's still running. It has not crashed because we found it. We found anything that would bring it down hard. Yeah, there were bugs. Yeah, they're still finding things in production. I know I haven't worked there in 5 years, but friends of mine still work there, and they're going, yeah, it works. It can work. It's not perfect. You're not going to find everything, but you're not going to go out of business either. That is the gist of it. I'm now going to declare open season. Be kind to me. I'm going to try and keep track as best I can and answer questions. All right, go. Eric.
So, you're kind of talking about these user acceptance test sessions where you bring in people maybe in a test lab and you've got stuff set up so they can play around. Are you saying that you would bring in people from, can I call those modules maybe, each one of your circles?
Yep.
Would you bring in people from each of those modules and have them all working together, or are you saying that you would do that, have them working separately within their own silos testing?
Okay, the question was, would I have people coming in from each module testing together or testing in a very siloed manner? The answer was yes. It depends on what the systems were. It depends on where they were located. If we were in the same building, absolutely. We'd have them come in and play with stuff. And that way they got to compare notes and see what they were seeing. And that was part of where the strength came in, because if they saw something that looked funny, they didn't have to rely on making a phone call or something. They'd say, Sherry, can you come over here and look at this? This is what I did. How come this is coming up this way? Or my favorite was Craig, who was a little on the odd side. And he would intentionally key in item codes wrong just to see what happened. But he did that when he was working anyway, so it was kind of fun for him. All right, Mimi.
We actually did a lot of that. We would bring in, the actual work is done in 10 different centers around the country. And you have units that put in the tax return, transcribe it. You have people that work errors on the front end. You have people on the back end who, after it goes through the system, says, oh, yeah, well, you said you earned this much last year, but we've just matched it and you really didn't. So it goes back down. So we would bring in people from Philadelphia and Cincinnati and Detroit, and they wouldn't know each other, and this person would input the tax information, and this person would work an error if it happened, and this person would work the back end. Well, the person in the middle would find this problem, and these are just regular tax examiners. They're not coders, they're not testers than some of our testers, because they could confer with each other. They could say, hey, you know, I'm seeing this on my screen. Is that what you input? And the person inputting would say, well, no, I have the transcript here. I input, it transposed that number. You know, so it was actually really cool to get these people who had no testing background to come in and see them develop as testers and actually be able to do a better job because they understood what it was supposed to do versus what we read it was supposed to do. So unfortunately, because of budget cuts and stuff, this year they're saying, oh, we can't afford to bring all these people in from across the country. And we're like, you can't afford not to. But that's a different story.
Okay, I'm going to see if I can summarize that in about 30 seconds, and then I'll get to Bill's question. The question, I think, or the answer, I think, was actually addressed to Eric's comment about, does this actually, how do you suggest doing that? And my understanding is that, Mimi, that you brought everybody in, or you brought in representatives and had them tinker, had them play, had them do essentially what they normally do. And you found all kinds of good stuff.
Yes, and we kept them in the same room. Get back to the point of your question that I never really addressed. We kept them in the same room because they communicated better and actually were able to test better when they could crosstalk.
Makes sense.
Okay, Bill.
It sounds like what you're saying is that when all these different functions are in there playing, that it gets quite chaotic in there, which is good.
Yes, I love chaos.
Yeah, did you find that the defects that you found, because of the amount of chaos, were more difficult to track down?
Some of them were actually very easy. Some of them were just absolutely impossible, to the point where, let's see if we can reproduce this. And if we kept track of what people did, because we made them keep logs. This was many years ago, before there were some of the tools that are available now, and we literally had them keep legal pads next to them and generally track what they did. Didn't have to be precise, but we had to have some idea what they were doing. And most of the time, they brought in actual worksheets that they'd been working on, for example, that morning, and then tried them on the new system just to see what happened, because they saw what they had just done, right? And sometimes we found some absolute monster bugs, and that would take a week or two to take apart. But normally those were the ones that would have bit us, because we had no test cases that would have considered them. Having said that, they became test cases later. Yes, 49.
Yeah, you mentioned, I think, briefly about those systems mirroring production.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's key in some projects I've been on. Some of those modules don't have the funding to have a test environment, so they only open up temporarily. So we hit production and maybe they wipe it out, or so that's always good to recognize. You might have a little bit of risk there with some of those modules not being able to provide you with as much time as you need to hit them.
Yes, to summarize the comment, which I think that was in less of a question, right? That there's the comment involved the cost of doing this, and because it can be fairly expensive, and you may not be able to for a variety of reasons. That unfortunately boils down to a business decision, I believe, and somebody's going to have to pony up and say yes or no. And then it becomes a challenge out of your hand, and you have to do the best you can with risk mitigation and let people know, communicate that challenging message that this could be an issue because of these conditions. Okay? Michael Hunter.
Something that can help mitigate that Microsoft is starting to do.
You're close enough. I'm just going to hand you.
Something that can help mitigate that cost of cloning an entire system, which maybe can't be done, like if you have an entire data center that this will be running in. Testers generally don't get their own data centers. Microsoft is starting to do this more and more now, and it's what we did when I worked at a bank years ago, which Microsoft is calling testing in production, where you have your production systems running. Side by side, you have the new systems running. At the bank, we'd compare output from both, and at some point, they were the same long enough that we'd say the new stuff works. At Microsoft, we have ways in web services, this is really easy to do, to say, well, the test team gets redirected to the new stuff, but everyone else just sees the old stuff. And then over time, we can start seeing 5% of the team of the people using this web service or this website is directed to the new stuff. And as we get more and more confidence that the new stuff works correctly, we can cut more and more people over. And then eventually everyone's using the new thing, the old stuff goes away.
Yes, 189. If you want to sneak up here, and I'll just hand you the mic. It's a quick question, okay.
You said you were going to tell us the original title of your talk.
Do you remember the comment slash question was, it was a comment, it was not phrased as a question, so if this was Jeopardy, you'd lose. The comment was you told us you would tell us the original title of your talk. I presume as a question it would be, what was the original title of your talk? And the much, much longer version, where I go into a lot more detail and talk about some of these things, was based partly on comments that James made this morning in his keynote. Not on this in particular, but things I've heard him say many, many places, and things that Michael Bolton has said on occasion, and that I've heard him say and that I've read, and that's, if you have an idea, name it. And the name that I had was the result of a local tester group meetup where we had a fun get-together, and it was going to be pizza and adult beverages, and we were going to give presentations based on pop culture. And one of the developers that I work with, a very enlightened software program code writer, goes to the local tester meetup just because he thinks it's a lot of fun, because he gets to do games and exercises differently than he normally does with the Java development group and some of the other meetup groups that he goes to, because we are weird as far as he's concerned. But as we were planning what this month should be, he said, somebody needs to do something about Pulp Fiction. And the title should be something like Pliers, a Blowtorch, and Mr. Wolf. And I actually wrote a blog post in response to that, so I give you then the Pulp Fiction School of Integration Testing, where you take different scenarios, throw them together into a bloody mess, and see what happens.